Welcome into Basketball by Association. My name is Arky Shea. That is the long desire to be seen face on YouTube and the hope to be heard voice of one Mr. Joel C. Cordes. Joel, way too long. Nothing has happened, so we shut it down now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a hot minute. It's good to be back. Took our little break during the dead period of the NBA, but the NBA is never dead. And, I just keep calling up Joe Tsai from the Brooklyn Nets and telling him, look, Joe, it's either me or Ian Eagle to do play-by-play for your team. And for some reason, he keeps choosing Ian Eagle. I don't understand it. But Arky Shea, this is episode 115 of Basketball by Association, and it's good, man. It's good to see you, too.
I don't think listen, Ian Eagle's fine if you like that kind of like professional, good sounding broadcaster vibe.
Yeah, but he's no Joel Cordes.
He's no Joe Cordes, and he's busy with football too. Like you got a full-fledged, like you could be a Nets straight up only fella, except for when like Minnesota comes in. Outside of that, like you could be straight up neutral, and more importantly, you probably want to be a homer for that broadcast. So
yeah, I mean, I told him it's him or me, and I'm sure Joe is, deliberating. He's deliberating hard. He's talking to his legal team. He's checking his options right now. So.
Do you have a jersey number before I move on to the next topic and get to the show?
I do, yeah.
I'm not trying to push you forward. It's
good.
It's been so long since you and I have done the show. I want to make sure we're still, are we still good? Are we still all right?
I mean, we're still good as long as you weren't calling up Joe saying it's him or me, which, I mean, come clean if you are, but episode 115, it's Arky Shea, the Zelmo Berti episode. This one is a weird one. Yeah, this one is a weird one because no player in NBA history has logged 115 playoff games. So we couldn't even go that route. We couldn't even do that. And instead, we had to choose an entirely different category. And I chose 115 career combined playoff games of NBA and ABA. And so we get to Zelmo Berti, a player that most people of a certain age, under the age of, 60, have never heard of. But I had to do some digging on this one. And first of all, Zelmo Berti is in the Hall of Fame. He's a 5-time All-Star. He was a 1971 ABA champ, 2-time All-NBA player. He was the All-Rookie on the all-rookie team in 62-63 on the NBA side, and he's on the ABA all-time team. So this is a guy who averaged 20 and 10 multiple times, in fact, 20 and 15 during one season. Started in the early 60s with the St. Louis Hawks. They made their move to Atlanta, and then he tried to make the jump to the ABA, and the NBA filed an injunction against him and did not allow him to play for the entire 1969-1970 season because he was trying to jump leagues. He eventually was able to play with the Utah Stars, got 3 All-Stars there in the ABA, and eventually wound up back on the Lakers in 74-75. So this was one of those rabbit holes where you're like, oh, Zelmo Berti, what the heck? Wait, Hall of Famer? And then you jump in and you're like, dang, there's a story here. So I'm actually I'm happy about it. This was kind of what this whole little trope was about, was naming the episode after players that maybe we hadn't, really dug into or heard of, unless you were a really hardcore long-term NBA historian or just a huge NBA geek where you know all the names.
Can you imagine in today's National Basketball Association, the very player-friendly venture that it is, them going to court with a player over anything?
I mean, on the one hand, no, but then on the other hand, think of like the PGA Tour and what's happened there and all of the like legal wrangling that's gone on back and forth where you've got the LIV tournament or whatever and players jumping ship. Like, so on the one hand, I say no, but what if there was a rival league that just popped up and had a whole bunch of, let's say, foreign money behind it or something like that? And I know we've got the different like global leagues, but stuck it right here in the US. I mean, and guys were just breaking their contract. Now, I don't know all of the Zelmo Berti story about whether he was still under contract with the Hawks. I don't think he was. I think he was a free agent, and they just did not want him to leave the league, period. But can you imagine that if, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant show up and are like, no, we got this other league and we're going to go do that. And by the way, I still have 3 years on my deal, 4 years on my deal with the Nets. Like, I could see some court action going on.
They do it now, Joel. What do you call the Drew League? Right?
Well,
like, what is that? Come on now. Like,
that's not happening during Yeah, it's not happening during the NBA season, though.
Yeah, but that shouldn't mean anything, right? Tell you what, if I'm the Lakers and I see LeBron out there just dunking on people at YMCA's and playing in the Drew League, I'm a little like, I know you like basketball and all, but there's only so much left in you, and
it's fair. It's fair.
Why not save that for us?
All it takes is the one time, that NBA megastar tears an ACL in the Drew League. That's all it takes.
Now, if it's Paolo Banchero or something, I'm like, do whatever you want.
Right.
You got 100 years to get healthy. That's how the NBA looks at investments, right? Do whatever you want. Joel, this episode is going to be dedicated to, of course, the aforementioned, but also the to be mentioned. And I can't even remember if I've already mentioned him on this podcast, but it's a Kevin Durant special discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Not only, but particularly because that's essentially once free agency cooled, which doesn't take long in the NBA for it to just shut down for the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
You get that initial rush, and then you just get players slowly filtering through that are sort of on the outskirts of teams or just on the outskirts of trying to be able to glom on with a team.
Right.
Kevin Durant's been different. Kevin Durant's been attempting to force a trade, demanding a trade, demanding ultimatums, whether it's get him off the team or the GM and the head coach off the team. Joe, so much so that this is the middle of August, and the NBA is trying to figure out its national TV schedule. And this uncertainty has cost the Brooklyn Nets potential national games because they don't know, does the league, where Kevin Durant's going to be when this thing tips off in a month. It feels like it's not that far away that these things have to start to get, ironed out and figured out. I think the NBA is announcing their schedule. Is it this week or next week that they're trying to announce the schedule? So, Joel, what is up? What is going on with Kevin Durant? And then I'll get later to what you think is going to happen. But what is causing this to happen now, you think?
That's really the big question. I mean, this topic, like you said, has been out for a while. It's been dissected in a lot of different ways. People have brought up, the great but kind of obvious points that, KD, you wanted to be here. They built this whole thing around you. They moved heaven and earth away from a rebuild that was going very well with Kenny Atkinson at the helm. D'Angelo Russell was the star at that point. They had a bunch of young guys. They were moving in the right direction, and everything got put on the back burner for Kevin Durant, which, again, as an MVP and a multi-time champion, that makes sense, but it happened. They moved heaven and earth to get Kyrie Irving, to get James Harden, and now to come back and want to be traded out. It just reeks of New Jersey Nets. It reeks of what this franchise dysfunctionality has been with its stars. That's all been laid on the table. I guess for me, the parts that really, really bother me about this is the timing and the details. The devil's in the details here. Kevin Durant could have demanded this trade at the end of last season when everything had completely fallen apart. They didn't make it where they wanted to be in the playoffs. He could have said, regardless of what happens with Kyrie, I want to be done. Instead, he was vaguely quiet, yet vaguely loyal. And then when Kyrie said he's opting in and everything's good, that's the moment that you decide to demand the trade. Here again, it comes back to, look, you may have decided that you and Kyrie are not on the same page and you're not buddies anymore, whatever. That's irrelevant. You wanted that guy there. You made them add Kyrie Irving. You knew what you were getting into. Kyrie Irving is not under a long-term contract. So like you and I have said, like Dan Lewig and I said in the couple weeks that he was filling in, like just play out this season with Kyrie. See how it goes. Both of you have oodles of reasons to play back up your trade value, to play back up your reputation. But to wait until the moment that Kyrie is like, yeah, I'm on board, and then your hand-picked guy, that's when you say, I want to be out, that's bad enough.
Yeah.
But if you want to just demand that trade and say, look, I'm done, and I don't care if I come off looking like a giant James Harden level jackass in this, because that's where this is moving to now.
What you apparently have James Harden level at the top level. Okay,
that's about the top level. Kyrie is right there. Kyrie, at least, I'm going to give him, even though I disagree with the stance, 99%. Kyrie's level of jackassery with the Nets was around a cause of personal choice. And again, while I disagree with so much of the rationale behind it, and I disagree with so much of Kyrie, I get it insofar as he was saying it's my personal choice about what, I'm going to pump into my body. Fine. There's a little bit of a higher calling to that than James Harden just going, oh, it's hard here now on this team. I should go. Get me to
By the way,
a better
that's a
night
spot
club.
on James Harden.
But so it was bad enough for Durant to do that. But then to play the whole, well, coach or GM's got to go, both of them's got to go, or me, like that makes no sense. Because it was rumored, heavily rumored, that when KD and Kyrie came in, they did not want Kenny Atkinson. Sean Marks, the GM, was already there in place. That's fair. But there was apparently no problem at the time with Steve Nash. Can we call him handpicked by KD? Probably not. Can we call him signed off by KD? Probably. Fair. But if you are going to be this wishy-washy about demanding that trade, and then to somehow come back and be like, oh, but I'll stay if you fire the coaches, and again, bend over backwards for me. That's akin to your significant other showing up and going, I want a divorce. I want a divorce right now. But if you don't divorce me, can we put on that 4-season porch?
Yeah.
Like, we'll put on the 4-season porch, and then I won't divorce you. And you're like, pass. There's some hard red flags here already that the 4-season porch, sorry to throw you into that, Steve Nash and Sean Marks, you are the porch. Like, it's irrelevant to the fact that you want the divorce.
Yeah, what I don't understand is, okay, so I get that Kevin Durant's not really that concerned about his reputation, right? To me, like, everyone has made up their mind on Kevin Durant. He's had enough years in the league to earn whatever reputation that you sort of want to put upon him, whether you believe in the Durantula, or you believe just in the player, or you want to glom on his sort of title chasing from Oklahoma City to Golden State, and then to sort of try to create this super team, in the dark, in the weeds at the All-Star break with Kyrie Irving a couple of years ago. Yeah, you've got your mind made up about Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant probably knows that. What I don't understand is, alongside what you're saying, is how does this help you?
Exactly.
Right? Like, how does this serve you? As far as I know, now I know Kyrie, I hate him. Okay, that's fair. Okay, I could not be friends with a Kyrie Irving.
But you want him on the Knicks nonetheless, right? I mean, we've talked about that before too.
I would 1,000 times out of 1,000 want to play ball with him if I were, so bad that I would have to fall down to his level. Like, I'm pretty good at hooping. So, like, I'd have to take a couple steps back down to come back to the NBA. Like, I'm like Monstars. Yeah,
sure.
So but I think, by the way, I definitely took Patrick Ewing's power, not anybody else's. So I think if your intent is to try and go win another championship, and you looked at this offseason as a chance to go find yourself somewhere else, Kevin Durant's not dumb. Kevin Durant's got to understand that Kyrie Irving, the chances that he was going to go get mega buku bucks somewhere else, based on how he had sort of performed and acted, and the way the market was going to be with him, and the fact that we saw like him play like 9 games, it felt like last year, was not fair to think that that was going to be a big thing. So you had to think in the back of your head, there's a strong possibility he opts back in for big cash with the Nets.
Yeah.
So why wait for Kyrie Irving to make that decision before you ask for the trade? Like, you know that there's a good damn chance you're going to have to play with him this year, because it's not easy to move a Kevin Durant contract. And not to think that Kevin Durant's not good, because last year for a long stretch he carried that team and he was
MVP caliber. Yeah, absolutely.
How many more years do we got of him at this level? We ask the same thing about LeBron all the time too, but Durant had injuries. You know, Durant's what
35, I think. I'm double checking.
I was about to say 34, 35. Yeah,
33 right now. It'll be 34 during the season.
Okay, so going into his age 34 year in the NBA, dude's been around for a long time in this league. This just makes no sense to me. Like, it doesn't make sense to be able to try to shoot your way off a team when Kyrie, who is your best chance to, if you have to stay on this team, to win the championship or to even contend, opts back in. And then now you're in this weird thing. Because I'll say this one thing, and then I'll get back to you, sir. I feel like I've spoken a lot.
No, you're good.
For as weird as a guy as Kyrie is, and this is what I was going to get to a moment ago, that someone that I don't like, right? Someone who has his particulars as far as whether or not he was good with LeBron when he was with them, or like enjoyed him, I should say, or other teammates don't like him, you know, burning sage in the locker room trying to get rid of spirits. I don't know a lot of stories of him actively being a bad teammate.
That is true. So, and the players that he's played with have been like, nah, he was fine. A little weird, but he was fine.
Yeah, he's weird, but he's not a bad teammate.
Right.
This doesn't help. Like, this doesn't help, like, his incentive to want to, you know, distribute to you. And when he was on the court with you, Kevin Durant, who was definitely listening to this, you got the ball a lot from him. So none of this makes any sense to me for someone who was very business savvy inside the game, other than he has to think that I've got like a 3-year window tops to be at my close to prime, and I can't let the Nets try to put pieces together. I've got to go find another place to try to get another championship. That has to be the only thing that's in the realm of making sense.
This word gets thrown out as it's a hot button word, and it's overused by those who detract against the NBA, especially and often of late for political reasons. But it gets thrown around with professional athletes in general, and it does cover plenty of truth, and that's the word entitled. But I think that's absolutely applicable in this case. Kevin Durant coming off as 125% entitled with the timing, the tone deafness, the order of events. Like, again,
the fact that he went and had he had the trade request and then had the meeting with the
owner, governor.
And like went to London, I think, for that meeting, right? And then there said, okay, well then get rid of the coach and GM,
right?
Like,
essentially saying you're not going to keep
you and Kyrie Irving are the two guys who are like, there are no coaches on the team. We're all coaches. Right. Like last year, you're like,
yeah,
this is just bizarre.
You're right. And you make that definition
for this position.
Yeah, you make that demand a month before training camp starts. Again, you could have had all summer to work through this. It's just the entitlement of what it took to get the Nets to build all of this, and then to continue bringing in Kyrie and DeAndre Jordan, who had nothing left in the tank, but he was a buddy of Durant's, and so they gave him money and a starting job that he very quickly showed he didn't earn. The James Harden experiment is one of the all-time great flameouts as far as NBA trades go. For the amount of time that he was actually on the team, what it took to get him, and what they gave up for him to leave, like, it's one of the all-time great disasters. And then to be calling for it, like, here again, it's not just about the Nets, and it's not just about the esoteric idea of Kevin Durant's reputation, which of course he doesn't care about theoretically. There's a very practical side to that reputation though as well. And I've talked about this many times before, and we see it every couple years in the NBA with stars that hit their early 30s, not understanding that Father Time will be undefeated, and that when they get to that megastar status and they start acting like a complete jackass, it will come back to bite them 9 times out of 10, if not more. Like, Durant is not making it easy for some other GM to go, ooh, yeah, I should move heaven and earth for that guy. Because if Durant can do it to the Nets, he can do it to you too.
Well, on that, let me wrap up the Kevin Durant talk with this thought, well, this question to you, and then we'll move on to one other topic that you text about that I think is interesting that I want you to set up. The hottest story as far as potential landing spots, as far as excitement and possibility, was the Boston Celtics. And that rumor that, that the Nets allegedly have their ask out there and what they have essentially told the Celtics that they want. Now, some people have debunked, whether or not this was an offer, so to speak, or was just an ask or just a feeling out process. But Joel, you brought up perfectly the idea that Kevin Durant is the guy that could do this very well again. This entire thing.
There's nothing that's going to stop him from doing it until his cachet drops or a team, the other teams stand up and don't play ball with this.
So let me ask you that then. Does the Kevin Durant potential for a 2-3 year, maybe that's kind of the top end of being super carry a team MVP level action, is that enough, do you think, for a team like the Celtics, who clearly proved last year that they're heading in the right direction with young talent, some returning veterans, and guys who have been on the team for seemingly forever? Worth it to make a move to send picks, to send players, and to, potentially send one of their 2 best young players. Not their best, I would think. They're of the 2 young players, but clearly one of the top 2. I mean, in Jaylen Brown. So is that enough if you're Boston? That potential, knowing that you're so close, to bring in someone like a Kevin Durant and to try to get over that hump?
It was prior to this latest trade demand of the me or them thing. But by saying that, it shows where Kevin Durant's head is at. It shows the entitlement, the pettiness, all that stuff. Boston already did this once. They were on the right track. They were building to something great, and they made a mega trade to bring in a guy named Kyrie Irving. And they had a loaded roster with Kyrie Irving, and 2 years of dysfunction, and he was gone, and they were left holding pretty much nothing for all of that.
Oh my God. And I hear you putting Kevin Durant and Kyrie in a very similar dysfunctional basket.
If I'm the Boston Celtics, and especially because Brad Stevens coached those Kyrie Irving teams, and so far Brad Stevens has shown us that he's not an idiot. Like, I can't imagine that this has any sort of real traction from the Celtics side. It's so insane to potentially repeat the exact same scenario.
Okay, so I get that Brad Stevens had. Okay, right. Okay, so I get that Brad Stevens has some scar tissue there, right?
Has to.
Is Kevin Durant better than Kyrie Irving on the court for, let's just say it only goes well for 1 year? I mean, the goal is to win the championship, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. So if Boston was close last year and Boston has to get rid of one young player, we talked about last year whether or not they would, they were thinking about doing it.
Splitting them up.
Right. So it's clear that something's still on the mind, because you've read stories about him sort of being shopped around and sort of what would Boston be able to get in return for him last year. For even if it's just 1 year and Kevin Durant just blows the thing up, if you get that title, I mean, Boston's all about putting up the banners, man.
Yeah, like, but here's the thing.
I mean, I just don't know if you worry that much about building for the future if you don't know if a championship, if you feel definitely Kevin Durant could get you the championship this year.
You do worry about that longevity if you are an already contender, somebody who is in the mix. Kevin Durant's trade demand means that Boston, Golden State, Miami, and I'll even say Phoenix, all of those teams that are already on the cusp should be off the table for Durant. They should be looking the other way because they were doing fine without him, and the risk of it all falling apart and you giving up too much for a guy who could break down, whether physically or mentally, for your team is too much. If I'm a near contender, somebody who really is in that middle ground, I'm talking like Toronto or Denver or Charlotte or Atlanta. No, it's not too much. I'm still in the Durant sweepstakes, and maybe I start to sweeten the pot. Dallas would be another one. I start to sweeten that pot, and I'm willing to take that risk because I am not an actual front-running contender yet, and getting Durant there and getting that one ring for those franchises that do not have a lot of rings to work with and do not have a track record of a plan in place to make it happen, it's worth it. It's the same reason why Kawhi Leonard to the Raptors for 1 year and a blow-up was worth it. But Kawhi Leonard to Miami for a year and a blow-up probably wouldn't have been worth it because Miami's been to that mountaintop before and had those rings, and they want that longevity.
I would disagree, and then we can move on. I would disagree with you on Miami. I don't think Miami's at the point where I would say that they are a legitimate Eastern Conference contender just because of the moves we've seen just this offseason, right?
Sure.
So
that's fair.
I think if they could get a Kevin Durant, that could be the piece that propels them, depending on obviously what they had to give up to get him. We have a pretty good idea, but who knows? That could be the piece that makes them an Eastern Conference champion contender. But I understand where you're coming from. Otherwise, I don't know. I get the fact they can blow up your locker room, but it's so hard to win these championships. There's only a handful of teams that are doing it. That it's a risk you have to. I think it's a risk you take if you're someone like Boston,
and that's why Durant can get away with this because he is that good.
Yeah,
but that only lasts for so long, and as soon as there's any slippage at that, these actions will come back to bite you. They will come back. The NBA has that memory, and it'll come back in your next contract, your next trade, your longevity within the league, whatever it is. This karma does not go away, even if you got away with it now.
And Durant's probably got 2 years tops for that, whatever. I mean, the cash is already eroding as it is. I mean, come on. I mean, Kevin, if you're listening, and you are, relax. Enjoy the rest of your career. Try to win some games with Brooklyn. You got a pretty good superstar right beside you.
And not a terrible roster around you either.
Now you can play all the games. And now you don't have to worry about all the dysfunction that's happening, with James Harden. You can just be you and your bro Kyrie. You guys built the whole thing, right? You
finally get to do what you wanted to do in the first place. And now that you finally get to do it, now you don't want it? How spoiled is that?
It is spoiled. Joel, break down this Lakers text that you sent me about, because it's an interesting conversation I want to get to, but I want to hear where you were coming from as far as the youth for the Los Angeles Lakers and where that could lead them coming up this year.
Yeah, so there's a totally different approach going with the Lakers, and I'm very intrigued to see whether it's at least not as bad as last year. And, last year it was bringing as many former MVPs as you can. Carmelo Anthony, Rajon Rondo, Dwight Howard, so on and so forth. Obviously, Westbrook coming in, former MVP, LeBron, Anthony Davis, MVPs. I'm forgetting at least one in there, I think, as well. You had all these veteran guys. They were loaded up on veterans. We saw the holes in the roster, especially defensively and three-point shooting, but the idea was these guys are going to be so veteran, so wise, that they'll figure out how to fit in. They'll be overqualified for their roles. It'll be fine. It was not fine. It was a disaster. Los Angeles has gone 180 degrees in trying to build the supporting cast this year. And on the one hand, you can say, oh, you learned from your mistake. You're getting some young legs around LeBron, around Anthony Davis. Those guys absolutely need young legs. That energy, that pep is going to be up. They're going to be able to play at a higher pace. That's all good. But on the other hand, you sense a little bit of that desperation, that swinging pendulum desperation of going, oh, that didn't work. Pressure's on. We got to do the exact opposite of this. Kendrick Nunn may or may not be returning to the Lakers. But right now on the roster, looking at young guys who are going to play pretty big roles. Lonnie Walker, the fourth, coming over from San Antonio, has shown he at least belongs in the league. Austin Reeves may or may not be a rotation player in the NBA, but they're going to find out. Talen Horton-Tucker, I do think is a rotation player. Troy Brown Jr., Stanley Johnson, very fringe NBA roster players up to this point. Stanley Johnson, though, had a very high pedigree coming into the NBA. Juan Toscano-Anderson belongs in an NBA rotation. He showed that in Golden State. They were just too deep. But is he going to be that classic type of guy that when you ask too much of him, he's going to be exposed? Wenyen Gabriel barely made the Lakers roster last year on a couple of 10-day contracts, but showed out enough. Damian Jones at center has bounced around the league a lot and been given some starting stints, at least, in Atlanta with the Lakers previously. I think he got one with Portland. It hasn't stuck anywhere. He was on the Kings for a little bit. The one guy coming in, young guy, that I'm excited to see on the Lakers, if he can stay healthy, is Thomas Bryant, who was the starting center for the Washington Wizards for a couple of years before he got hurt. Really seemed to be coming into his own. In fact, when Russ was there in Washington, the first, half dozen games that Thomas Bryant was healthy, Russ and Brad Beal and Thomas Bryant looked really, really good together. And then Bryant got hurt, was out for the season, and that scuttled a whole lot of different things. So they're taking this different approach, Arky. The energy has to be higher. Whether the basketball IQ will be higher, I don't know. But as I look around that group of guys, I see a better defensive unit for sure, and a group that should be able to get out and run a little bit more for sure. I still am not sure where their three-point shooting is coming from, because there's not a single specialist out of that group unless they're really trying to turn Austin Reeves into that. It's a lot of guys, again, that classic can hit a three, but not necessarily a three-point shooter. And you're talking the same thing with your stars. And LeBron, Anthony Davis, and Russell Westbrook, of course, is not a can hit a three guy, but a please, for the love of all that is good and pure, do not take a three guy.
Joel, to me, it's a hodgepodge, right? But it's not the best hodgepodge, if that makes sense. I think Los Angeles fought themselves into a very unfortunate LeBron corner here. Which is LeBron thought the way that they were going to be able to punch through this next championship, the non-bubble championship, was to, as you say, lock up on dudes who have been in the league and won MVPs and who have been really, really good. But weren't going to be very expensive because they were essentially walking out the door of the league.
Yeah.
You put yourself in a very bad position because you didn't play to that roster, right? Like your style wasn't able to fit with that roster very well.
It's also arguable what the style of the roster would have been to work,
That's fair. That's fair. They did do a lot of experimentation with the styles on the court this last year. This year, I think what's smarter is to go for what you clearly had to do, which is cheaper talent. but also younger, because you're going to need dudes to take a bunch of minutes off of the veterans you do have to be able to even think about making a deep run into the postseason. Let's first get to the postseason.
Right.
But I think I like it because it's the only logical choice in this. It is a desperation pendulum shift, but it's the one they should have made to start off with, which is to invest in younger talent, invest in some sort of up-and-coming shooting, some outside shooting as well, which would have been nice to have year 2 of that going into this, as opposed to now getting it for year 1, which, as you pointed out, they still don't even have, really, for the most part. Although Russell Westbrook does shoot the 3 at like 29%, so that's pretty good. But, Joel, I don't have a lot of expectations for the Lakers this year. I mean, they spent basically the entire last year trying to choke away Russell Westbrook off that roster.
Yeah.
He's still on that roster. So you couldn't get rid of a major piece that would have helped you financially and would have helped you just from a schematic standpoint. We know Anthony Davis is never healthy. Like, we're just not going to get a full season of Anthony Davis ever again. I'm never going to expect it. And if I do expect it, I'm the idiot, because he's shown that that's just not what happens.
Right. And if it actually does happen, it'll be the world's most pleasant surprise. Good for him, right? But it's not happening. That's not happening.
You can hope for the best. You should prepare for him to be around for 75, 80 games. Like, you should just hope that he can give you 65 or 70. Like, you get 70 games of Anthony Davis at high level, you're in a good place.
Yeah, I agree.
Really good place.
I agree.
You're probably going to get like 55 this year. So it's just kind of what happens. So this roster, although looks like it should be better, it's not cohesive. Like, there's the pieces just don't, to me, they don't fit very well together. And when they do play together, they're sometimes pretty good. But like, I feel like when I watch them, like, they're plotting, they're not very interesting, they're slow, they're methodical, and sure, it's because you had 60-year-olds on the team last year. That's why I think this movement has to be what helps sort of reinvigorate some of the energy on this team. And then who knows, right? Maybe with you open up the floor a little bit, you get a little more movement, if that's what they're going for. I don't know at this point. Then I think you could sort of see an influx in positivity, in energy, in results on the court, and maybe you're not struggling to try to make the play-in the last week of the season.
This all comes back to, again, LeBron's arrival and his demands for a team to be built around him quickly. Remember, the Lakers had plenty of young guys there when LeBron got there. That wasn't good enough. He needed veterans. And the urgency and cachet of LeBron was that the Lakers were not going to wait for free agents to show up, but instead had to clear so many assets to bring guys in on trade. They traded for Anthony Davis. They traded for Russell Westbrook. They traded for others that came aboard to, lesser players, but these were the big ones. The Lakers have nothing left in the tank to try to fix this. So you're right. They've painted themselves into that situation where this is the best dumb idea they can come up with. Right. And it is what it is. And so this is literally the bed that LeBron made. He is having to sleep in on the tail end of his career because he treated this situation exactly like what he did when he arrived with Cleveland, when he was younger. And the Cavaliers, again, moved their young guys to bring in old guys to make it happen. And they did get a championship out of it. And they did get championship appearances. And that means the world in a place like Cleveland. But it also wasn't sustainable. We saw that by that last year. And LeBron saw that, which is why he jumped ship again. Coming to LA, one championship doesn't really matter. It doesn't.
And it's the bubble championship.
Yeah.
The fans aren't as attached to that championship as they are to other championships. They didn't get to see it.
It's in LA, you don't build a championship, you have to build an era. And LeBron has not really built an era there, or at least one that's going to have him in the pantheon of Lakers greats. I've seen that talk around a little bit this week too about, well, is LeBron even a Lakers great yet? And I would say no. LeBron is a good, great, all-time, best player, whatever you want to say, who played for the Lakers. He's not an all-time Laker.
He's been around the Lakers for 7 minutes. Like, you can't just like give him that because he won a bubble championship and then had some MVP performances. But I mean, it's the Lakers where he also missed for the first time. Missed a huge chunk of the season.
Right.
Like you can't make that argument. Like, okay, then Jalen Horton-Tucker is an all-time great Los Angeles Laker at that point.
And this is going into his 5th season on the Lakers, so it's not inconsequential. But you're right; the actual output of greatness has been so few and far between, and with such an asterisk on it. And
I mean, this is the Lakers. There's been a handful of dudes who have been able to be really, really good.
Yeah.
Like, if he had this type of performance and he was a Raptor. Yeah, he's probably an all-time great Raptor.
Oh, the all-time great Raptor. Yeah. I'll just leave it at this. Going into last season, we said, if you squint hard enough, there's a way this could work for the Lakers. But they need an all-time season from LeBron. They need a absolutely healthy season from Anthony Davis. Everybody's going to have to, roll into their jobs and fit perfectly. But if that happens, I could see how this would work. And it didn't. It was too many what ifs. And it felt like last year the Lakers didn't get any of the what ifs that they needed. They didn't get a single one.
Nothing went their way.
They're in the same position this year where if you squint hard enough, you can go, I get it. And I see how you could talk yourself into this. But man, there's a lot that's got to happen. And who knows? Maybe it's not a Murphy's Law thing. And the Lakers are going to get a few of these things to go their way. And that puts them into a playoff berth. And they become one of those dangerous veteran teams that can win around and then take their chances in the semifinals. That feels like their ceiling right now, right?
The good news for this team this year is that they are a veteran team. They aren't just a veteran team. Right, like they have experience and top-end experience with their top-end guys, but it's not just dudes who's been in the NBA for 15 years. Like there is a little bit more of an influx in the youngins to hopefully be able to take some minutes off these legs. Give Anthony Davis some time off. Maybe if you've won, 3 or 4 in a row. Or if you've got back-to-backs and you can afford to sit Anthony Davis for the second or the first.
And theoretically, to help on that...
Joe, let me look at this schedule. I'll tell you which ones to sit Anthony Davis on the next show.
Theoretically, most of these guys that were brought in are supposed to help on the defensive end. Because if you have to choose one area that they're stronger at, almost all of them, it would be defensively. Thomas Bryant, I think, is a fair two-way guy where he's been pretty good at both.
Well, who are the really good teams last year? And who are the 2 teams that played for the championship last year? 2 really strong defensive teams.
Mm-hmm.
And defense still in a league that likes to put up a bunch of points. When you get to the playoffs, you compact those games and you compact those scouting reports and you compact like every single moment of film that you're watching. Defense matters still. Defense absolutely still matters still. So if you can get help on that end, I mean, I don't know if it's going to buy you a handful of more wins throughout the season to get to the playoffs, but if you do, you can't hate the position that you're in to at least give yourself a fighting chance.
No, I agree. And defense does not shut teams down for long in the NBA, although we did see some of that in the playoffs last year, really some throwback type of performances. But what good defense does in the modern NBA is it gets you a few key stops along the way.
Yeah,
and
that's what you need. That's what you need.
Those few key stops can turn momentum or stunt momentum for the other team, can energize you, and beyond the cliche of just close games and that sort of thing. But it oftentimes is a momentum swinger is what it does.
I mean, the best one I could think of just off the top of my head was the end of what game was that with the Celtics and the Bucks, right when they got the block at the end and then the steal from Marcus Smart to sort of put the game away. I mean, it was key moments, good defense being played, got that to a game 7. I mean,
absolutely. And whatever the Lakers do, they're not going to be better than Golden State unless the Warriors go through, an injury ringer like we haven't seen in 5 years. But even if they did, like, they're so deep that they probably can survive some of that. Denver's going to be better, especially if their guys come back. Dallas showed last year that they are on schedule. Phoenix is on schedule. Minnesota's going to be in that mix. Memphis may be a legit, absolute contender this year. New Orleans is going to be in the mix. The Clippers will be in the mix. You got a couple of young wild card teams like Houston that could suddenly start stealing games from people if they mature a little faster. Like, Portland's still around. It's the West is the West, and the Lakers are not good enough to even be called like a clear-cut contender in the West. They are they could be there type of team. But again, that feels like a topping out in the semifinals type of thing where your stars, it's not about reaching upside. It's about avoiding regression, and that becomes scary. They're all at that age and that injury thing now where it's about avoiding and fighting Father Time, not like a Phoenix Suns team where you're like, oh yeah, those are young guys, and if they hit that next gear, or Memphis, they hit that next gear, man, look out. Minnesota's the same way. Man, look out. It's a totally different type of calculus.
It is funny how we're talking about them. Like, hey, listen, if they just they don't walk too fast on the way to the gym, and pull something, they might have a shot that night. but like you said, it's a bunch of injury-prone older guys, and some of them just can't shoot. Russell Westbrook likes to attack the rim, and that's where he's really, really good. Yet he's chunking threes. Just because I guess it's fun. So whatever.
There's too many teams in the West that on a nightly basis you're going to pick them as the favorite over the Lakers, and you're a little concerned for the Lakers in those games.
Yeah.
And there's too many of those teams that when you get into a playoff series, the only thing you're hanging your hat on if you're a Lakers fan is to go, yeah, but we got LeBron and we got theoretically Anthony Davis, and look at how good those guys have been. You don't want to face those guys in a playoff series. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but that's like the only thing you can still say if you're a Lakers fan, because there's a half dozen other teams in the West right now that are just flat out scarier and are likely to be better.
I don't like the chances for the Lakers to win the West or the title, or even a playoff series. But I don't hate their chances to get into the playoffs, and even to get in the playoffs safely, right? Mm-hmm. Not have to play in. Like, there's a scenario I can see things work out their way. Maybe you just get the reverse of, Murphy's Law, that you do get a few things go your way, as you mentioned earlier. And then once you get into the playoffs, it's matchups. Who you got, and it may be by the time we get to next April, we got a whole different idea of what this Lakers team is going to be. And they've just, as some of these young dudes just turn into, like, they just found the spot that works for them. Maybe playing alongside LeBron, and Anthony Davis was able to play a majority of the games this season. And, Russell Westbrook's having a career year from three, hitting 31.5%. Maybe some of these things just line up enough to get like the 6th seed, and then it's, who you got, right?
There's only one plausible scenario where I see them being better than what you just described. And that is that Durant somehow gets himself traded off of the Nets, and the Nets go into full rebuild mode and go, we would rather pay Russell Westbrook to stay at home, and we'll lower our asking price just a little bit. They move Kyrie to the Lakers. They make him the Lakers' problem. They take on Russ, and they go into their rebuild. But Kyrie landing on the Lakers, younger than Russ, able to hit the three, he's played with LeBron before, theoretically that change of scenery and the motivation, but we've said this about Kyrie so many times, and then he shoots himself in the foot. But it would not be a terrible situation. You and I have talked about it before. We can wrap up here. Like, being in LA would not be a terrible situation for Kyrie, and it would be a better situation for the Lakers than Russell Westbrook there, probably on and off the court. And if that happened, I could see the Lakers going from absolute best case scenario of, maybe getting to the semifinals without Kyrie Kyrie shows up, I think you best case scenario could make it to the Western Conference Finals. But there's a lot that's got to go right. But I think you top out there. I think you top out there.
Sure. Well, plus you're talking about a mid-season trade, so you're talking about Kyrie Irving maybe not having enough time to make LeBron James hate him even more, and LeBron realizing this is his best chance to be able to win it, to sort of cooperate and play well. With Kyrie. And listen, Kyrie's a clear upgrade over Russell Westbrook for you if you're the Lakers. And, I mean, that's what the Lakers have been wanting this entire offseason is no Russell. Could we get Kyrie? And listen, the Kyrie deal is not going to hurt you much anyway. Kyrie's only on a 1 year, opt-in deal here. So, you're talking, fairly apples and apples here. That could work. Listen, a lot of movement can still happen. That could work. But in the meantime, until they make that trade, Joel, we are not going to do another show. So I hope that trade
happens.
Yikes. Joel, we will do another show. But until then, would you like to say something nice to the folks?
Well, thanks everybody for joining us on the Zelmo Berti episode. And if you want the video version, find us on YouTube, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell over there. If you want audio only, you can find us Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Arky, was fun. Let's do this again sometime.
And let's talk about how good the Knicks are going to be, huh? Come on, like
we are getting to the division preview portion of the season where we got to start going division by division and picking our winners and talking about that stuff. That's one of my favorite times of year. So it'll give us a reason to talk about the Knicks. Because we're
don't need a reason to talk about the Knicks. Basketball's a reason to talk about the Knicks.
We'll be contractually obligated because they play in the Atlantic, and we'll be talking about the Atlantic. So
and alphabetically, it's near the top.
All right. True fact.